Well, we saw something from LSU on Saturday night against Florida that we haven't seen yet. So, is that going to be the new normal, or was it simply just a one-time thing? And what each could mean for the future of LSU football. We'll get into that on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube as well. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I'm your host, as I am every day. I've been covering LSU football since 2016, and I now host a sports talk radio show in Nashville, Tennessee for ESPN 1025 The Game. But a huge win. Huge statement win for LSU going into the Swamp, a difficult place to play, a loud and rowdy place to play. Only this team's second road SEC game of the season. They went in to the Swamp and they dominated Florida. And I know that the final score doesn't necessarily reflect that. And maybe dominated is kind of a dramatic word to use, but I felt like even though it was a 10-point win, which is still a big win, even though a 10-point win, you wouldn't say, well, that's not domination. That's not like a 30, 40-point blowout. And it wasn't. But I say dominated because I feel like LSU was in control of that game and had firm control of that game a majority of the game. Now, the entire game, no, because we still had some special teams mistakes, still had Florida able to get up early and capitalize off of some LSU special teams mistake with death, taxes, LSU special teams problems, and other teams being able to capitalize off of them. Things that are inevitable in this world. But I digress because I felt like the way that they were able to come back from that and was able to hold on to a lead, I was very pleased with what I saw from LSU on Saturday, and I think that you should be too. And I want to get into everything that I saw from LSU, all the good things. But first, I want to start with some of the things that I didn't like, because albeit it was a really good game, and I think that I feel better about LSU than I did going into this week. And I think that I feel more confident about LSU now from what I've seen from after Florida than I have, since I would say probably the Mississippi State game. So it's been a few weeks. But first, I want to highlight the things that I didn't like, because as I say every week, I know a win is a win, and you're going to take one in this league wherever you can find them. But even in wins, you can find bad things. Even in losses, you can find good things. The three things that I didn't like. First and foremost, I already touched on it, special teams. I tweeted this on Saturday night. I double down today. Get Brian Polian out. Relieve him of his special teams duties. I love the idea of Brian Polian kind of serving in like a GM type of role, where he's the head of recruiting, where he's doing the face-to-face, where he's doing the schmoozing with mom and dad and showing the recruiter on campus and spearheading recruiting and kind of being a liaison for NIL and that kind of thing, kind of like the business side of things. I think Brian Polian's great at that. We have seen enough from the special teams. I've seen enough from special teams for me to say that there needs to be a change. Because I understand that no position group and no unit is going to be perfect. But I always say, make mistakes, just don't make them twice. Well, LSU's made special teams mistakes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times over now. We saw another muffed punt against Florida. Defense forced a 3-and-out, and then they totally just give it up. And Florida scored a touchdown. They're up 14-7 after that muffed punt. I always talk about digging yourself into a deeper hole than you need to be in. That defense forcing a 3-and-out and then just giving up 7 points, that's, taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And I'm sick and tired of seeing LSU do that on special teams. I'm so over it. Because no, the special teams mistakes against Tennessee, that wasn't the difference in the game. Didn't help, but it wasn't the difference in the game. And no, special teams mistakes didn't cost LSU the game against Florida, but it will cost them games in the future. It did cost them the game against Florida State. it's stupid mistakes. Illegal formation on a punt? How? How do you illegally form on a punt return? I have never seen that before. So between the muffed punt and the illegal formation on a Florida punt return, it is so puzzling to me. And I would be willing to offer up a little bit more grace if LSU was dealing with a lot of like young and inexperienced players. They're not. Jack Bech muffing a punt. He's not a player that drops balls offensively. We know Jack Bech. We've seen stuff from Jack Bech. He's a great player. And yes, he has to catch those balls. But you're either coaching it or you're allowing it to happen. And it's repetitive mistakes. Even if it's not Jack Bech, it's Malik Neighbors who's muffing punts in week 1. And then it's Jack Bech muffing punts against Florida and then dropping a kickoff against Tennessee. It's same stuff, different day with special teams. And I'm over it. I can't see any more of it. I cannot see LSU play a close game with Ole Miss and lose that game because of a muffed punt. I can't do it. I will literally turn over and die if I see that happen. I cannot do it. And something needs to change in special teams. But a little of a silver lining there on special teams. Credit to Damian Ramos because he was able to seal that win with that 47-yard field goal late in the game. LSU came down to a single possession. Florida was going to get the ball back at the end of the game. That field goal sealed the win for LSU. So credit to Damian Ramos, who has been nails a majority of the season. So while I'm moaning about special teams, credit to Damian Ramos. The second thing that I didn't love, that I wasn't obsessed with, was the defense on Saturday night. This team was always keeping me on my toes because I don't really know what to expect week in and week out. 1 week against Auburn, they completely stuff the run. They're great up front. The secondary is missing tackles. What in the world happened there? And then there are some days where the secondary is just lights out making tackles. The opposing offense can't do a thing. And then the pressure isn't there on the quarterback. So what was LSU's brightest spot, what has been LSU's brightest spot all season long, really struggled against Florida's run game. Now, I'm going to say that also understanding and acknowledging that this is a really good run game. I mean, I mentioned it last week on the podcast. I have it in my notes right here. Just how good Florida's rushing attack is. I mean, let's see. Oh, Montrell Johnson averaging 8 yards a carry. Insane. Trevor Etienne averaging 6.8 yards per carry. Nuts. Naquan Wright averaging 4 yards a carry. Great stat line. I mean, those three had a combined 9 rushing touchdowns on the season through, what was that, 6 games? 7 games. Math is hard. And then Anthony Richardson, adding on top of the running back depth, who's averaging 6.1 yards a carry. This is a really good Florida run game. And I said that was one of my keys to victory was you're going to have to stop the run in order to beat this Florida team. And it seemed like LSU's defense struggled stopping the run. I mean, Florida ran for 210 yards total on Saturday night. Anthony Richardson contributed more than 100. And then, of course, that 80-yard touchdown run, that's a majority of his running stats. They're able to stop Anthony Richardson fairly well at the line of scrimmage, but giving up that 81-yard touchdown run, that's when I started to sweat a little bit. LSU's going into the fourth quarter with a 3-touchdown lead. I won't back down plays on the speakers. And then all of a sudden, Anthony Richardson is just able to pop off. Looks like Usain Bolt out there, and that defense couldn't make a damn tackle. Also, benefit of the doubt, Anthony Richardson is a big-bodied quarterback and is difficult to tackle. But I saw 2 different LSU defenders just miss tackles and just almost looked like kind of like half-ass tackles. So that was one thing that was a little bit puzzling to me. 4 touchdowns rushing total on the night for Florida. They weren't able to completely eliminate the run game as a factor. And if LSU's offense, which you want to get into, that was really fun. If LSU's offense didn't look how it did against Florida on Saturday, if it looked more so maybe like an Auburn offense, then they're not able to overcome giving up 4 total rushing touchdowns. So it's like, it's kind of a little bit of give and take and a little bit of something different every week with this LSU team, which is to be expected when it's a team that's still kind of figuring out who it is. And they're still kind of learning their chemistry and learning one another. But I wanted to see the defense step up just a little bit more against Florida. And the third thing is just cleaning up those mistakes. 2 consecutive false starts in the red zone. Nick Storrs and John Emery back-to-back false starts. You saw Brian Kelly get really, really frustrated. I believe he was yelling at Cole Taylor when he came off the field. The false start was on Nick Storrs. But you can't commit those kinds of penalties, especially in scoring position. They LSU's driving into Florida territory. They're at the Florida 17. You've been hit with 2 back-to-back false start penalties. Now you're at the Florida 29. And that's a much different story than the Florida 17. When you need those points, when you need those security points, can't do those kinds of mistakes. That's the third thing that I didn't like was, kind of the sloppy mistakes, the 2 consecutive false starts in the red zone. But other than that, special teams and defense, I think special teams was more glaringly obvious to me. Defense didn't look as dominant as it has throughout the season. So those are the 3 things that I was looking at here. Now, coming up next, did what we see from LSU's offense, something fixed? Did something click there? Or was it just a flash in the pan? We'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about SimpliSafe. So in the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe home security to protect their home. And with that many people, numbers do not lie. That many people do not get involved with something if it doesn't work. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. And at SimpliSafe, they do it right, because at SimpliSafe, your safety is their number 1 priority. It's the only thing that matters. And I know that because I use SimpliSafe at my house. So they're able to protect you with cutting-edge security technology. They've got 24/7 professional monitoring agents who will always have your back. So here's why I love it. I'm such a paranoid person, and I live in a very popular, kind of poppin' area of a very populated and popular city. And I always hear people, yelling outside, out on the sidewalk. And sometimes it's a little intimidating. Sometimes it's a little bit scary. And I want to make sure that my home is taken care of. And I want to make sure when I step out the door, when I fall asleep at night, that I'm protected and that I'm safe. And I feel exactly that with SimpliSafe. So one of my favorite things about SimpliSafe's technology is it is going to be able to cover every single inch of your home. So some other security systems may only check the front door or only one area where you put the camera. That's not the case with SimpliSafe. They will cover every single inch of your home, and you can watch the crystal clear HD live stream of security cameras on the go, on your phone, on their app, so you can make sure that you have an eye on your home wherever you are, if you're on vacation, if you're at work, if you're away, even if you're just sitting at home and you want to know what's going on outside, you can do that with SimpliSafe. So to customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedoncollege. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. So I want to get into all the 3 things that I did like. I do that every show after a game. But I want to first look at, first and foremost, the offense, because that was the 3 things that I did like. All involved the offense. And first, I want to look into Jayden Daniels, because that was a Jayden Daniels that we have never seen before. We've never seen Jayden Daniels look that confident, cool, and collected in the pocket like that. I'm sure he's had better games, against Tennessee, throwing for 300 yards. So it was the most he'd thrown for all season long, the most he'd thrown for since 2019. So what happened with Jayden Daniels? What clicked? He went 23 of 32, 349 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. And then that stat line alone is Superman. 349 yards and 3 passing touchdowns from Jayden Daniels, a quarterback that all season long we've been saying, hey, I don't really know how many games LSU is going to be able to win. If Jayden Daniels is throwing for, 175, 200 yards, maybe a passing touchdown, maybe a short little shovel pass in the end zone. But these are big boy stat lines. These are the stat lines that we've been waiting for, that we've been asking for, the passing game from Jayden Daniels. That alone, dynamite. And then you add on his rushing stats, 106 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. And to cap it all off, he did not turn the ball over once. 0 interceptions. 6 total touchdowns on the day. To put that into perspective, just how good that is. Joe Burrow never threw for 3 and ran for 3 touchdowns in his tenure at LSU. I'm not saying Jayden Daniels is Joe Burrow. I'm not saying that he's better than Joe Burrow, but I'm just saying, just to put that into perspective of just how monumentally massive that is for Jayden Daniels. The stat line alone, and also the breakthrough. Because the 106 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, albeit a great stat line for a quarterback, that's not something new. We knew that Jayden Daniels was a very talented runner. We knew he was a mobile quarterback. We knew that if it was going to be, a short yardage situation in the red zone, he'll probably just defer to his legs and run the ball on himself. It's great. I mean, that's what he does. And that's not a knock on Jayden Daniels. That's just the kind of quarterback that he is. But it's the breakthrough in the passing game. He looked so comfortable. He looked so sure of himself. He looked like a completely different quarterback. And I said after the Tennessee loss, and I can't remember if I said this on a podcast or just, chatting with friends or both. I thought, that loss to Tennessee, an embarrassing loss to Tennessee, that could have been the best thing that could have ever happened to this team or this offense or Jayden Daniels. Playing a really good Tennessee team, and I think that loss looks a little bit better now after the Tennessee beat Alabama than it did, after it actually happened. I thought they could have two different things could happen. One, LSU just carries on business as usual and they skate by and, win as many games as possible, but they accept an embarrassing L to a really good team. Or this could unlock something in this team. They could wake up and be like, we got to be better than that. We don't want to lose 100-0 on our home turf. We're not going to do that anymore. We need to do more to win games and to compete with the Tennessees and the Alabamas of the SEC. And I think that's what happened here. That, Kayshon Boutte's first touchdown of the season against Tennessee, Jayden Daniels said that's kind of what we needed. I needed that reassurance. That's what something just clicked there. That's huge. And I think also just a wake-up call of how good these receivers are and how good this team can be if they just throw the football. And Jayden Daniels throwing the football against Tennessee, albeit to dig themselves out of a hole. But still, the fact that I think he realized, hey, I can do this. I can throw the football. I can be bold. I can say, F it. I got a receiver down there, because they probably will be. So something happened after that Tennessee game where something just clicked, and we saw it from Jayden Daniels. He was patient in the pocket, where previously, if he did sit back in the pocket and wait, he looked antsy. He had some ants in his pants. And if he stepped back, he'd probably jet off running. And we saw some of that confidence build a little bit throughout the season. It ebbed and it flowed. It wasn't lateral growth. We saw some good things from Jayden Daniels. We saw some bad things from Jayden Daniels. But he's never looked so patient and confident in the pocket. He stepped back. Felt very sure of himself. And he was bold. That's what Brian Kelly asked of him the week going into the Tennessee game. I need to see more risky throws. And that's not always what you want to say about your quarterback. Hey, make risky decisions. But risky decisions are better than no decisions at all. And he was so much more bold on Saturday night. He was hitting those deep shots. That 54-yard touchdown pass, where'd that come from? I mean, he threw some of those 50-50 throws where, his receiver was one-on-one, where previously he probably wouldn't have taken that risk. Probably would have said, hey, I don't want to throw this into traffic. On Saturday, he was making those 50-50 throws, and those receivers were catching those 50-50 balls. They were winning those. Just to give context to the risky throws or the more bold throws that he was making, it 8 15-plus yard passes, including that 54-yard touchdown pass to Drake Jenkins that I just mentioned, and then the 24-yard touchdown pass to Brian Thomas. A 24-yard pass isn't necessarily a deep bomb, but it's more than what we've seen from Jayden Daniels. 54-yard touchdown pass, that absolutely is more than what we've seen from Jayden Daniels. So 8 15-plus yard passes on the night, I think, is just proof that something broke through for Jayden Daniels. Now the question is, can that be sustained? Because part of me wants to be super excited about this offense and super excited that, okay, Jayden Daniels, figured something out, and, 400-yard games from Jayden Daniels isn't going to be crazy to ask for in the future. Part of me wants to think that. But part of me also thinks, was this just a really bad Florida defense? I mean, I read off these stats last week that Florida's defense statistically, 98th nationally in yards per play, gave up about an average of about 6 yards per play. 125th nationally in third down conversions allowed. They're giving up 412 yards per game. That's good for 99th in the country. I can't tell if it's just a really bad Florida defense or if this is a new LSU offense, that something just awoke within this offense, within Jayden Daniels. He feels more comfortable. He has enough time. He's built that chemistry with these receivers that he can make more risky throws. I tend to believe with most things, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I think there's a good bit of truth to the fact that Florida just has a not very great defense. Brady Cook, threw Missouri's quarterback, threw for 220 yards against Florida. That was his second highest yardage stat line of the season, behind his 297-yard performance against Abilene Christian. And quarterbacks can throw on Florida's defense now. So I probably a good bit of truth to the fact that Florida's defense just isn't very good. But I also think that there's a good bit of truth to Jayden Daniels doesn't look that confident on accident. Jayden Daniels doesn't look so night and day patient and bold and willing to throw the football on anyone. I think that this offense is evolving. I think that you saw that against Florida. Maybe it's not going to be a 6-touchdown performance every week, but I do think that we are starting to see a peak of maybe what's to come with Jayden Daniels and an LSU offense that's able to move the ball downfield a lot more effectively. Coming up next, what else did we see? Did we see a breakthrough from someone else on the field that wasn't wearing a uniform? We'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about betonline.net, because it is your number one source for all of your football betting information this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find. That's my favorite part about BetOnline, is it's not just a sports book. It's not just a place where you can wager on games or parlays or prop bets, anything like that. You'll also get analysis. So if you're thinking, hey, I want to put some money on a game this week, well, you can find that on BetOnline. You can find betting expertise on BetOnline. And that's why I love betonline.net. And as always, they are your continued source for all of your sport wagering information. They've got live betting, up to the minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events. They've got MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us preferred podcast platform. You can also find us on YouTube as well. So just search Locked on LSU in the search bar, hit that subscribe button, and you'll get notified as soon as the podcast drop. But we saw a breakthrough from Jayden Daniels on Saturday. I just mentioned it. 6 touchdowns, 3 in the air, 3 on the ground. He just looked so cool out there, just so chill. Where normally in the past, we've seen Jayden Daniels kind of sometimes look like a chicken running with his head cut off. And so maybe there was a breakthrough on Saturday night. Maybe that Tennessee loss was the kick in the pants that this offense needed. I don't know. We'll see against Ole Miss. And we'll have a full breakdown on that game throughout the week, because Ole Miss is going to have a much more stout defensive front than you saw from Florida. But I'm wondering if we maybe saw another breakthrough, a different kind of a breakthrough from somebody who wasn't necessarily in pads, They were on the field. And I wonder if there was a little bit of a breakthrough with Brian Kelly on Saturday night. Brian Kelly made some very questionable coaching decisions really throughout the season. I think it was most apparent against Tennessee, where he made so many decisions. I was like, what are you doing going forward on fourth down? Going forward on fourth and 14? What are you doing? What are you doing not deferring? What you know that your team has played its best football in the second half. It's a second half team. You know that it would be so much more advantageous for your team to have start the second half with the ball rather than giving Tennessee momentum in the second half. What are you doing? You know better than that. I think what we saw from Brian Kelly on Saturday night also could have been a breakthrough for a couple different reasons. Deferred. Thank goodness he deferred. And it paid off for LSU. It paid off. They were able to score in the third quarter on that possession. And LSU went into the fourth quarter up 3 touchdowns. Now, it was a cut in, by 2 touchdowns very early on in the fourth quarter. Made me sweat a little bit. I mentioned that. But I think that was a little bit of a breakthrough there, that don't get too cute with it. Don't try and outsmart the game. Just do what makes sense. Keep it simple. Do what makes sense. Defer. There's a reason why literally every single coach in football at this level, at the NFL level, in high school, in Pee Wee, I don't even know if you'd have a coin toss in Pee Wee football. It doesn't matter. If they did, they probably defer. That's for a reason. Because it just makes sense to give yourself an extra position in the second half. I mean, thank you. Thank you, Brian Kelly, for choosing to defer. The other thing that I noticed from Brian Kelly that I thought was a little bit interesting was that sad little, teeny tiny little flimsy piece of paper in his hand. I first saw that, and I think you probably had the same reaction. I thought, is he calling plays? Did he just snatch that little privilege from Mike Denbrock? And he clarified that later in the week, said Mike Denbrock was calling plays and that he was basically there just to be like a little nudge or a little bit of a reminder, where Mike Denbrock might call a play and he'll say, hey, reminding you of field position, reminding you of the down, reminding you of yards to go, reminding you of just the situation in the game. So Brian Kelly was there and had that tiny little flimsy piece of paper in his hand, not because he was calling plays, but because he was almost like a little backbone for Mike Denbrock. Almost, I don't like to use the word babysitter because it sounds kind of demeaning, but that kind of sounded like what it was. Like Mike Denbrock had his learner's permit, and Brian Kelly is his dad saying, hey, you got someone in the lane next to you. You might not want to switch lanes yet. That's kind of the vibe that I got. But I think that was a good thing. And I think that was a change that needed to be made, because the offensive play calling just it just felt so much better. Like so many times when I was just banging my head against the wall earlier this season, when I'm like, what are you doing when you got a wide open receiver 20 yards downfield? What are you doing, passing it off for 3 yards to the tight end, to the freshman tight end, when you've got an all-American wide receiver in the backfield? Throw it there. Just situational play calling in the past I was frustrated with. And I think there was a breakthrough with Brian Kelly in terms of an understanding of this team, an understanding of the game, and also that tandem of Mike Denbrock and Brian Kelly kind of taking control of not the offensive play calling duties, but just kind of splitting awareness of the offense. I think that was important. And I think we saw something on Saturday night from the players executing those plays and from the men that were doing it. I liked what I saw from Brian Kelly, from someone who frustrated me so much after that Tennessee game. After that Florida State game, I was so frustrated with some of the decisions they were making. On Saturday, he coached a pretty damn good game. I think that LSU had a pretty damn good game plan. I liked what I saw. And I think that you should feel confident, more confident in this coach and in this quarterback. 2 things that I think a lot of LSU fans were a little bit nervous about, had their questions or doubts about the coach and the quarterback. Hopefully, because it was for me, the questions and the doubts and the concerns have eased a little bit after what we saw from Florida. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Now we've got a full slate throughout the week. We've got John Garcia, who is a recruiting insider for SI Now. He will check in with us. We'll see how LSU is doing in the recruiting throughout the season and see how the regular season could influence recruiting. We'll also chat with the host of Locked On Rebels. We'll get a full preview of the Ole Miss LSU game, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But you can get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Everyday host Chris Cordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. Make Locked On SEC your second listen.